Welcome, one and all, to this very special episode of DIY Cinema Cult. This is the very first of our series of episodes in which we will take an up-close and beady-eyed look at some of our most iconic filmmakers, and more specifically, those filmmakers who have created independent debut feature films with a completely self-reliant and DIY ethos. To start, we're going to take a trip back to a very dark place. We will be peeking inside the mind of one of the world's most uniquely disturbing and creatively uncompromising filmmakers at the very dawn of his career. In this episode of DIY Cinema Cult, we plunge ourselves headfirst into the dark, disturbing and soupy nightmare world of David Lynch and Eraserhead.
Yes, we are here. I am Marc Hardman, and you beautiful person, are Mr. Aaron Trinder, aren't you?
I am. I believe so.
You still are. I think I still am Marc Hardman.
You definitely still are Marc Hardman, and I think I'm still Aaron Trinder. Although there are days when your identity is not so certain. You wake up.
No, you do question it sometimes.
You wake up at 6 in the morning after a particularly strange dream, and you kind of not quite sure where are we, who is we, what is we, and in some ways that kind of confusion sort of brought about through the dream state is a little bit about where we're about to go today, isn't it? It's sort of
it really is. We're about to talk about a film and a filmmaker that I know you're a massive fan of, as am I.
Yes, absolutely.
So when was the first time you experienced Eraserhead?
I think, strangely, it was one of those films that I saw the poster that struck me as, totally other and scary and beguiling and kind of bizarre. And then I don't think I actually saw the film. I think I actually saw Elephant Man. I think I saw some of the other films, right up to the Twin Peaks series, and then I think I went back and watched Eraserhead, possibly when I was a student, I think, because it felt like this gap in my understanding of the God that we think of as David Lynch, and so in some ways the poster struck me the most, and I remember it because I was working as an usher in a cinema. My mum was the assistant manageress manager of the Swiss Cottage Odeon, and my summer job was to work at the cinema. And I remember there were two posters that really struck with me, because it was Raging Bull and Eraserhead, and they were the two posters that were like, what are those films? And I don't think I got to see them. I don't think I got to see them when the film came out, because I was probably too young, and it's probably a good thing that I didn't see it when it originally came out.
I think I was exactly the same as you. It was a film that was probably been in my conscious or subconscious, the imagery of especially the poster, like you say, from maybe like early teens right through, but hadn't seen it. It was one of them, I'd seen pretty much all of David Lynch's films to that point, and it wasn't until about as late as I'd just become a father for the first time.
Oh, wow.
So a very poignant point to make, for reasons we'll discuss in a minute, because kind of parenthood and fatherhood and that kind of change in one's life is quite a theme of the film in kind of many dark ways. And so I just become a dad, and we were staying at someone's house in Cornwall, and I found myself up on my own late at night, and they had it on VHS, and I thought, I've never seen this film from beginning to end. I've just seen clips of it or sections of it or imagery from it, and I just watched it on my own in the dark or completely alone, and it was kind of like a mind-bending, transformative experience, really, especially with the time of life that I currently found myself in too. So it was a very weird one. I should say that this episode will be spoiler heavy, so before you listen any further, and if you haven't already seen the film, and why haven't you seen the film, stop this podcast right now, watch Eraserhead, on your own in the dark if possible, and then come back to us. So hopefully now you're back with us and you're suitably disturbed.
What was interesting though is, again, partly because of the sort of world that we live in now, where you kind of think all films are at your fingertips. If you want to watch a film, you can click it into kind of your eyes by just looking at whatever your favourite streaming platform is, and there it is. But actually, this is one of those films that's not like that, as in, it took a bit of digging. I had to get the DVD, and the DVD turned out to be German, so which added a whole other layer of surreality to it. So my watching experience was in a way Lynchian, because it was the sort of German version.
Wow.
So I think in some ways it adds to a layer of mystery, but it shows that it's still got cult status, even though Lynch as a filmmaker has become such a kind of household name, even if he's never compromised on his artistic kind of approach. But that particular film still has a kind of a cult and underground status. And the other thing I was thinking the other day, which is very relevant, is that one of the other places I seem to remember it being on a lot, and I'm not quite sure if I ever saw it there or not, was a famous sort of cult cinema called The Scala in King's Cross, which was well known for showing weird films and often all-nighters. And I think, although it's well lost in the sands of time, I think I went to see it there, and I think I saw it with other Lynch films, possibly Blue Velvet, and I'm not quite sure what else, but it was one of those things where I probably watched it half asleep, maybe a little bit drunk, maybe after other substances. So I think, like you, every time I've seen it, I've not really had a kind of clean kind of 4K Blu-ray experience. It's always been almost like it was a dream in some way.
Exactly. It's along with those films that when you're a teenager, you get put on late at night, Full Metal Jacket and 2001 Space Odyssey, and these kind of films that kind of get put on super late at night. Let's start watching a film at like midnight or 1 a.m, and you never quite catch the full effect of that experience at all, do you?
No. And I still think when I watched it again recently, I still thought, this is a different edit. I don't remember this being this way round. Does it? I thought this was totally at the opposite, as in it has a non-linearity built into it. And maybe that was part just Lynch, but maybe it's also part of the fact that it was a very DIY kind of produced project as well. As in, it wasn't, I'm sure we'll go into this, it wasn't something that was kind of, written, shot and edited within a certain pace of time to kind of hold a specific, kind of tight vision. It was something that evolved over time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did. So should we dive in and take a look?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's go.
Ladies and gentlemen, please bring your drinks to your seats. Settle down for tonight's entertainment. Introducing to you right now on saxophone, Mr. Aaron Trinder. That's right. And playing jazz flute tonight with his ass, Mr. Marc Hardman. Boy, that kid can blow. Settle down, boys and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the DIY Cinema Club. All right, let's go.
Eraserhead is the 1977 surrealist horror written, produced and edited by David Lynch. Lynch, also in true DIY fashion, built the sets, built props, created the film's score and sound design. Shot in black and white, it was Lynch's first feature and stars Jack Nance, Charlotte Stewart, Jean Bates, Judith Ann Roberts, Laurel Fear and Jack Fisk. It tells the story of Henry Spencer, played by Jack Nance, a young man who is left to care for his grossly deformed child in a desolate, dystopian industrial landscape. Henry has taken a holiday from his job at a printing factory, but doesn't seem to do anything with his time off. He does accept a dinner invitation from the parents of his ex-girlfriend Mary, and once he is at their house, it is revealed to him that Mary is pregnant with his child, and they now must get married. The inspiration for the film is suspected to be Lynch's own fear of fatherhood. His first child, Jennifer, was an unplanned pregnancy, and she had been born with clubbed feet requiring extensive corrective surgery. Although Lynch professes that he has no recollection of when the idea of Eraserhead came to him or where it came from. Lynch does admit that he believes the film was greatly influenced by his time in Philadelphia. He and his young family were living there in a very troubled neighborhood, in an environment that Lynch described as having an atmosphere of violence, hate, and filth. Before embarking on his first feature film, Lynch had been studying for a career as a fine art painter and had previously created several short films to animate his paintings. However, by 1970, Lynch had switched his focus to filmmaking and had accepted a scholarship at the American Film Institute's Center of Advanced Studies. But Lynch disliked the course and wanted to drop out. It was only when the course leaders offered him a chance to produce a script of his own devising that Lynch changed his mind. Lynch was given permission to utilize the entire campus for his sets. This extended to the school's disused stable buildings and even Greystone Mansion, which was also owned by the AFI.
A start as a fine art painter makes a lot of sense when you consider Lynch's films and his work in general, right?
Yeah, and I think that you kind of feel it throughout the film because the whole thing is so textured. You know, it's not in a way a high concept film. You know, you think of maybe art kind of based films being sort of very high concept or you know, having a kind of overarching kind of you know, philosophical narrative or something like that. And I don't think that this really has that. I think it's a kind of, I think it's clearly an anxiety dream born into a kind of physical form, you know. But his work as a painter, obviously, he's very textural. It's very kind of, it's almost like a kind of, again, like sort of scenes from a nightmare or scenes from something spawned out of your mind at your lowest moments, you know. It's in, the documentary on him about his work as an artist actually sort of reveals a lot of this, and of course
the art life, wasn't it?
Which is what it's called. Which is a really wonderful documentary, but it kind of shows that in some ways, you know, all of this material, all this stuff that kind of springs from his mind, and he talks about kind of, you know, just falling in love with an idea and kind of allowing it to be manifest, is it's an interesting counterpoint, because at the time of this film I think he was probably suffering quite deeply, but in later life he kind of finds, you know, transcendental meditation, but he still embraces all of the darkness that does come out of the mind, and, you know, kind of in a way it's like this sort of dark canvas that he can kind of draw from at any one time, that he can fall in love with and then expresses in this very kind of non-linear and sort of artistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like it's interesting what you say there about Lynch feeling, you know, when you see him in interviews now, he seems to be very, very in touch and in tune and accepting of his own you know, he feels very comfortable with himself and with his mind, and but here we see him, probably he's a filmmaker, like you say, he is quite tormented. He's going through this change of life where he's become a father. It's unplanned. I feel like a lot of that has been put into this film. Do you yourself remember having any Lynchian nightmares when you reflect on your own experiences as a father?
Yeah, I mean, actually, of course, you know, because of course you have those kinds of feelings of like, oh, is your child going to be, you know, ill? Is your child going to come out and they're going to hate you? Is there going to be something wrong? But also, am I going to be a terrible father? You know, am I going to
100%?
Am I going to? There's no rule book for this stuff, so of course it's the ultimate anxiety dream. You know, you're literally the anxiety dream, which I think is, you know, clearly this is an example of, is like where you're thrown into a situation, you're a fish out of water, where you don't know what the script is. You know, I'm sure we've all had those dreams where you're suddenly on stage and you're naked and you've got to do a play and you've forgotten your lines. You know, I've had that dream many times, and in a way, this is like the ultimate level of that. You know, you're a father and you've got to. You don't know your script. You don't have any lines. You know, nobody's told you. This is the ultimate responsibility, and there is no rule book. So, you know, kind of grow up quick and that's a nightmare.
Exactly. And you look at your own father and you think, or fathers, as you see
Yeah,
them portrayed in literature or film, and you think, well, they seem to have it all together. They know what they have, all the answers. They get there through progression, through evolution. And when you're thrown into it, it can be just things that, so make you so anxious in terms of
yeah,
the fear. It's just the sheer fear of you failing at this very kind of grown up adult stage of life. But I think that's
absolutely.
probably what he's going through here.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting thing I heard. One night he was up late painting a picture of a garden, and it was just lots of leaves, foliage, but in a garden at night. So it was kind of very moody, a very Lynch image, actually, that you can imagine it in one of his films. And as he was looking at the painting, all alone at night, he swore he could see the leaves starting to move, and then he could hear wind blowing these leaves. And his first thought was, wow, a moving painting. And that's just what he had in his mind. And that's what led him to maybe start making short films based on his paintings, which led him into filmmaking completely.
You are listening to the debut feature film podcast. This is DIY Cinema Cult.
Lynch had originally presented a script called Greenback to the AFI, based on his own painting of a hunched figure with vegetation growing from its back. The script would have resulted in a roughly 45-minute long film, but the AFI rejected it as they felt that this was far too long for such a figurative and non-linear script. However, Lynch then presented Eraserhead. Several board members at the AFI were still opposed to producing such a surrealist work, but they eventually acquiesced when Dean Frank Daniel threatened to resign if the film was vetoed. So he had the headmaster stepping in to back him up. That's pretty cool. Lynch's script was heavily influenced by Franz Kafka's 1915 novella The Metamorphosis and Nikolai Gogol's The Nose, but Lynch was later to reveal that it wasn't until he opened up the Bible, read one verse and shut the book that he suddenly realized the true meaning of the film he was making, and Eraserhead came together clearly in his mind. Now, Lynch to this day insists that he cannot remember what verse that was, nor can he even report if the verse was Old or New Testament. But Lynch, on a number of occasions, has revealed that Eraserhead is by far his most spiritual film. Again, Lynch refuses to offer any further explanation to this statement.
So I kind of suspect a little bit of David Lynch bullshit here. I think he knows exactly what verse it is, but he's being, purposefully opaque maybe, and doesn't want to kind of let us into what he is really thinking. What do you reckon to that? And the idea of this being a spiritual film?
I mean, it's a funny one because I wouldn't. It's very opaque if it's spiritual. But I think other films he's done maybe are a little bit closer to that. I think in some ways, sort of Twin Peaks is a kind of good versus evil element to it, and there's some other films that are potentially, like that sort of, people being plunged into a kind of a netherworld, which is, you could argue as a sort of spiritual element to it. But I don't know about the spiritual part, but I'm sure that he's fucking with us when it comes to explanation because he's famous for trying not to explain things at all. And like a painting, in a way, it's like when you go to a gallery, you look at the painting for about 5 seconds and then you read the bit of text next to it for about a minute. There's always something that's kind of takes away from the pure art experience, doesn't it? Because if you've just had 5 seconds worth of experience supplanted by 1 minute's worth of explanation, then it's not really art, is it? It's something else. It's kind of explaining someone's idea that they did a doodle about. I mean, so in some ways I think he's always trying to reverse that, and he's always trying to present something that creates and evokes sensations, feelings, moods. They don't always add up in a traditional way. I think he has a fairly clear idea of what it means and meant to him, but he evades explanation all the time, and it's brave to do so, because actually increasingly, I think maybe in the 70s this was easier, but in the 80s, 90s and noughties and onwards, increasingly you're asked to kind of explain everything even before a project comes to life. You've got to basically wish it into life by telling everything, every single seed about it. The synopsis, the log line, the script itself, everything has to effectively be watertight, not just in terms of, it tells a good story, but as in everything it means has to almost be laid up front. Whereas when you see a Lynch film, you think, wow, lucky bastard, he's still managing to get away with pitching ideas. And this obviously is a great example of it, pitching an idea that it's so great to hear that his head teacher stepped in, because he obviously believed in him a great deal. But, pitching an idea which deliberately is obtuse, deliberately is about, evoking emotion and plunging you into those places that aren't explainable, because of course where it is spiritual and where I could see a description of what spiritual might mean to Lynch in this film and maybe some of the others, is that it's the mysterious parts of our experience. It's the not able to be explained parts of experience, maybe the things that are never explainable through words, through easy kind of reductionist terms, which is in a way the spiritual, isn't it? It's the kind of other levels of the human experience and beyond, which art can sometimes touch. As in a beautiful image. If it's just about something and you have that description, then that's fine. But if a beautiful image is something deeper than that, it evokes a kind of a magic, an awe, something wondrous. Well, you can write it's wondrous, it's full of awe on a piece of paper, but that doesn't make it that. It's the feeling of it, the experience of it, which is it. So maybe it's not spiritual in the kind of Christian or Buddhist or any of those kinds of ways, but it's touching the magic and mystery of the human experience, the things which go beyond language in some way.
Yeah. And I think he wants you to experience the film as a dream, doesn't he? He wants you to dream it when you watch any of his films. I think it probably started way back with this film, Eraserhead. Yeah. And so therefore he doesn't want to explain that dream to you, because every viewer will have a different dream when they experience the film.
Yeah.
I think. And I feel that, because his films are mysterious and bizarre and unsettling and, and opaque, he's constantly, although it's great that he gets the chance to make those films, it must drive him crazy, and he does show that frustration sometimes, that he's constantly being asked, what the hell does it mean? What is this, and what does it mean? And of course he's wise enough to know that, well, it means something for me, but by me explaining that will just kill it for you in some kind of way. Exactly how you're saying about having that description to clarify it in some way. And it's like when you sing along to a song for 20 years, that's your favorite tune, and then you actually hear what the real lyrics are, and you think, oh shit, I actually preferred the lyrics in my mind, or it's stuck in my head for the last 20, 30 years. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think he's doing exactly the right thing by not validating or clarifying, his images with anyone.
Casting began in 1971 and Jack Nance was quickly selected for the lead role. However, it is safe to say that the staff at the AFI had underestimated the project's scale. With the screenplay weighing in at a slim 21 pages, most deduced by using a common ratio that this would produce an approximately 21-minute long film. But the truth of Lynch's complex vision and meticulous direction meant that the film would remain in production for the next 6 years. Shooting often paused in order for more budget to be raised or sets to be built. One good example of this protracted production period is a scene in which Jack Nance's character Henry opens the front door of his apartment. A full year and a half passes before the shot of Nance entering the room was filmed. Nance, however, was so dedicated to the film that he retained his character's unorthodox and subsequently iconic hairstyle for the complete duration of production. As the production geared up to start shooting, Lynch and his crew took over the AFI's disused stable block. They turned the place into their own soundstage and had it at their disposal, an agreement that Lynch described as bliss. These stables were home to several large rooms and vacated workshops, all of which were turned into sets and production rooms. Even the stable's hayloft was used to stage the sets of Henry's girlfriend's family home. Lynch moved into the stables at one point and actually lived on and off for 2 or 3 years in the set of Henry Spencer's apartment.
So he's actually living, he's so immersed in his own world that he's created, he's sleeping in the bed of the apartment set of his main character. So he's kind of living quite literally inside Eraserhead for a couple of years. The talk about immersing yourself in your own world, and accounts vary about how long the film took to make. Some say 5, some say 6. I mean, I think it took probably 5 years to shoot and 1 year to prep. And I assume this because Lynch himself said in an interview that as he reached the end of his 2-year course at AFI, he'd been working on Eraserhead for a year, but they still had not shot a frame of film. So he'd been given this money. I guess he was given the budget maybe halfway through the course, 1 year. But by, the end of his 2-year course, he still hadn't even shot. So he was there. He was hanging around that place. They must have liked him, or at least were able to put up with him. He was there for another 5 years, just hanging out in the stables.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it is the DIY dream, isn't it? Just having space for you to just muck about and just to build sets and just play, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's often the kind of one of the big limits that everybody has is locations are probably the most expensive bit now.
Yeah.
As in maybe in, the 50s, 60s and 70s, it used to be cameras and film and that kind of thing. But certainly the concept of having a space that's all yours, I can understand that as bliss, it's in, even if you've got a tiny amount of money but when you're younger, you're just dedicated to what you want to make, and being given the kind of space is possibly the biggest thing that you could get, because everything else can fall into that. You can find people, you can find equipment, you can then it's time and space, isn't it? That's generally what you pay for. You pay for the time to make that project and then the place that you're going to do that project. So
he kind of had those two things laid on in a way. He had that kind of security of just having rooms where they could build these weird spaces and light them. And
with money running out after the first year of production, the film's budget was kept afloat by regular donations from Lynch's childhood friend Jack Fisk and Fisk's wife Sissy Spacek.
So I think Jack Fisk was a production designer. Yeah. And one of the first features he worked on was Badlands. So he met Sissy Spacek. So they were like husband and wife for a bit.
Great film, yeah.
Additional funds were provided by Jack Nance's wife, Catherine Coulson, who was working as a waitress and donated her income. Lynch also contributed to the budget with money he earned delivering newspapers. All costumes were bought second-hand from Goodwill stores or charity shops. Lynch and his crew bought materials from a budget hardware store that was closing down. They bought all their wood flats, a barrel of nails, wire, piping, and radiators. The bill of the entire haul came to $100. These raw materials were taken back to the stables and sets were built by Lynch and his crew, with Fisk and Nance all getting their hands dirty in order to start building the world of Eraserhead.
DIY Cinema Club.
The film's crew was very small, comprising of Lynch, sound designer Alan Splatt, cinematographer Herb Cardwell, who left the film after 9 months for financial reasons and was replaced with Frederick Elms, production manager and prop technician Doreen Small, and Catherine Coulson, who worked on a variety of roles. As mentioned before, Coulson was already working as a waitress during the day and would then work through the night on set. Lynch later declared Coulson as being the heroine of the entire venture. As cinematographer Herb Cardwell finished on the project, he helped bring Frederick Elms up to speed on the film during a 4-week transition period. Elms then worked on the film for a further 3 years. Frederick Elms went on to have an incredible career as a cinematographer, including working again with Lynch on Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. The visual effects used to create Henry's deformed child have been a well-kept secret. The projectionist who worked on the film's dailies was apparently blindfolded to avoid revealing the prop's true nature. The prop, which Jack Nance nicknamed Spike, has remained a mystery to this day. It has been speculated by The Guardian's John Patterson that the creature may have been constructed from a skinned rabbit or a lamb fetus. Grim. Shooting on Eraserhead was unconventional, to say the least. The crew would shoot through the night with people turning up on set at about 4:35. They would then have dinner together and then shooting would begin. Progress was described as being painfully slow.
So, Aaron, sounds like a very intense mode of working.
Yeah. Well, we all know how hard it is to kind of keep the momentum going during a DIY project, because you're running on empty from almost day one, and you're running on empty in terms of money, and you're doing everything. I remember when I came to the last day of your shoot recently, and you were there busy kind of figuring out what the shots should be, and then you turned around to me and said, what do you want for lunch? And I said, what? And then you said, do you want a jacket potato? And I went, yeah, great. And you got me a jacket potato with tuna. And I thought, oh, mate, I felt guilty that I hadn't been around to help you at least sort of sort everyone's lunch out,
It
But
was multitasking. That's the key, isn't it?
multitasking. But it sounds like, they were doing very much the same. And, you can only imagine the sort of conviction that they had that it was going to turn into something good. I mean, I don't think they probably thought it would be anything commercial, but they must have believed in Mr. Lynch's vision enough to go so sort of so deep and for so long. I mean, obviously, Catherine Coulson, who was critical, she ended up being the log lady in Twin Peaks.
She was the log lady. That's right. She
was the lad. So obviously, he created a kind of an ensemble environment as a result of working in this way. And that's really the only way you can do the DIY thing. You can't be a kind of a kind of dictator shouting and telling everyone what to do. It's got to have the feeling of like it's got to be like the Blitz. It's got to be like we're mucking in together. We'll work together. We'll eat together. And
you've got to create a family, haven't you, really? That's going to stick together,
Yeah, and so in some ways, that's why I think people have such a kind of powerful experience when they do this kind of thing, because it's like you're in the trenches, you really are having to have each other's back throughout the whole process. And he obviously kind of really did create that family, and obviously ended up working with a lot of those people in later
Jack
years.
Nance, he worked with Jack Nance again on several films, and clearly Frederick Elms, the cinematographer, and I think a lot of the people in Eraserhead, and I think they've all been financially rewarded since I've heard very handsomely, because he will, any money that Eraserhead makes, he will kick on to the people who back in these days, it sounds like they were literally just handing over paychecks to him, and just half of the money they were doing would go on the film. They just seem, because what strikes me is really how extremely dedicated the crew were, and he formed this really tight, like we say, a unit, a family. It's almost cult-like around this film. He created this kind of atmosphere around the film. Coulson, who was working as a waitress, she would bring like toasted cheese sandwiches from work, or any food that was kind of left, but that was going off at the pastries and stuff. She'd bring it all to that would be their food, snacks for the crew. And Fisk apparently he worked 2 jobs, and the second paycheck he would just hand over to Lynch for the film. So in complete dedication. They just saw something in him, and we can see how charismatic and charming David Lynch is now. And I think as a young man, he was no different. There's lots of accounts of women being quite fascinated by him as a roguish young man. So I think he had this kind of aura about him. He could charm people into going along with him on this kind of mad adventure.
Yeah.
We're making a movie.
Shot in black and white, obviously, on 2 Eclair CM3 cameras, so on 16mm. So I guess they were just film school cameras,
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
think
yeah. So,
the Eclair CM3s are really old. They're quite antiquated. You know, for when he shot, they would have been 30, 40-year-old cameras already. And
big things, yeah.
yeah,
Hence things working very slowly,
yeah,
not working with the latest equipment, working with whatever you can get. Obviously, back then, it wasn't that long since the kind of newer, lighter weight film cameras had kind of arrived on the scene, the sort of Bolexes and the,
right. And in the
the super,
60s, all the new wave films shooting on these handheld cameras out on the street. And
yeah,
I think the
absolutely.
CM3 is kind of the opposite. It was you could not move that. That just stayed where it was where you
No.
shifted it to, you know.
And again, that probably means that sort of has an effect as to what the look is like, as in
Yeah,
it is very steady, it is very kind of, um, tableaus. It's kind
yeah,
of moments that you see almost fully in wide shot, and then you do go in for the insert. It's kind of
yeah,
has a kind of that noir German expressionist kind of mood about it, and in some ways that might have been influenced by the fact that this was the only camera they could get. They're
yeah.
not chasing people around handheld. They're
Very
not
possibly,
using
yeah.
huge Hollywood kind of rigs to be able to swing the camera through sets or anything like that. It and we see that in some ways in sort of later films, don't we? That sort of
Mm,
what you get is what you get. Like um, Clerks, for example, is a sort of a later kind of indie film. You can tell they just shot on their film school camera because
yeah,
it's very sort of static, and it's that kind of pared down look, but it's all about the performance. And that was probably because they couldn't even dream of like having a
yeah,
moving camera. That's just a
yeah,
luxury well beyond. And now, of course, we've got an incredible moving camera. Everybody's got one in their pockets if they want one.
yeah, yeah.
But
That's
those
quite true.
creative restrictions just may well just bleed into what the aesthetic is, or you either embrace it or you lose the battle fighting against it.
Yeah. There's this brilliant book by David Lynch and Christine McKenna called Room to Dream. And in there's a great account of the shooting of Eraserhead by, there's an interview with Charlotte Stewart, who plays Mary, so the girlfriend, the
Mm,
girlfriend of Henry in the film. And it's her on her first day of shooting on the film. And on the first day, they were shooting the dinner scene at Mary's parents, where they have the chickens and the meets the mum
mm,
and dad, and it's very surreal. And so this is from Charlotte Stewart. This is her account. I couldn't believe how long everything took that first night. David insisted on doing everything himself. He really did everything. The light fittings had to be just so. He made the chickens for the dinner, meaning those animated prop chickens that ooze goop, I think. He had to touch everything on set. I remember thinking, God, this kid is never going to make it. He doesn't understand that you can't take this long in the business. I felt bad for him that he didn't know this. So I believe she was the only real professional, I guess, on the set. She was she was an actress who was working a lot in TV. I think she was in Little House on the Prairie or something. So she had come with she was experienced. She had knowledge of what a film set, TV set, a shoot
mm,
is like. Uh, Lynch, on the other hand, is coming from this kind of fine art background, and where the archetype of the artist is the sole creator who has to have his fingerprints on everything. So it's kind of you can imagine. I don't know how he works now, but it's you can imagine that causing so much kind of issues on the set of Eraserhead, and it really drawing out the time that it took to produce this film, because he was literally
mm.
controlling every tiny little aspect of the film.
It possibly connects with the fact that he's also done a lot of animation work, hasn't he? So,
Yeah,
and obviously in that traditional animation world, you can be potentially, obviously not with bigger things so much these days, but you are kind of God. You are there drawing, painting, doing every last little frame, moving every object, that kind of stop frame thing, which he's used a great deal. Sort of, is very Lynchian in a way. That sort of
yeah.
controlling absolutely everything. But I've also heard that he's actually a fantastic collaborator. Um,
Mm,
as in, maybe this is something he learned in later life, is in through doing things on a larger scale. Um, but a lot of people say that he creates a real atmosphere where you can just try things out and play, and he's very non-judgmental. And maybe that's something that is as a result of his experience after Eraserhead, or his
Mm.
experience, maybe something to do with his transcendental meditation, that he becomes a much more easygoing, less kind of uptight, less obsessive sort of
Yeah,
person, but still an artist. So yeah, it's an interesting one to hear that, because I think in later films he definitely became more of a kind of a curating the kind of film set in a very collaborative and kind of
yeah.
friendly way. A lot of people talk about how lovely it is to be on a David Lynch film set.
Because of course the next film he made, which was a complete leap upwards, which was The Elephant Man,
Yeah,
which I guess would you'd be considered as a Hollywood film, and with stars and so on. And at the start of the production period of that, he was trying to make the Elephant Man costume himself, the prosthetics and everything,
yeah, yeah,
and unfortunately failed dramatically. And I think it was even John Hurt who complained to the producers about him, and that this guy he's not going to be able to make this costume and direct the film. And I think he had a bad experience with Anthony Hopkins on that film as well, who was not particularly kind to David Lynch, because David Lynch, of course, was still a very young man at that stage, and of course he had his ideas of how to make films. And maybe that's was quite a key point in this transition we're talking about, from someone who was very controlling in every kind of detail to
mm,
letting go a little bit and learning that
mm,
actually filmmaking is about collaboration across a broad breadth of roles
yeah,
and jobs that need to be done. So maybe that happened. Maybe that happened over time. Maybe he got there over time.
yeah,
I do know that June, because then it was June, wasn't it? And that was another bad experience in which he suddenly went, right, I actually want to step away and kind of collect myself and start to think about just making films that I really want to
yeah.
make.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad first three films. It's interesting, isn't it? Although
Yeah,
June is a kind of a disaster in some ways, because
yeah,
when you look at it now, it seems so hammy, and it just doesn't quite land and work. And particularly now we've had the sort of the versions that have come out recently, you
mm,
see potentially that maybe it would have been impossible to make Dune in 1983 or whenever it was made, because
yeah,
it had to it had to be on a huge scale. But
yeah,
when
yeah,
instead you've got kind of, Sting with a backdrop projection that's clearly badly, you're not there. Um,
mm,
maybe the sort of technology hadn't got to the point, at that stage where you were ever going to pull off a vision like that. And I know he was very unhappy with the whole studio system, and being a sort of hired, effectively a gun for hire. Whereas Elephant Man feels, what I love about Elephant Man is it really feels Lynchian, but it's also got a very powerful story, and it has very emotive, incredible personal performances. I mean, John Hurt's performance is incredible in that, and
yeah,
I think he won at least one of the major awards for it. And and it's also Lynch being completely out of his comfort zone, because it was shot in the UK for starters. So
yeah,
he's gone from making a film with his friends effectively over the course of 5 years, in
yeah,
sleeping on the set, to coming to London and filming a Victorian story with a script that somebody else, I assume, had written, based on a
yeah,
true story. And that sort of shows how he is quite adaptable. And there's a few other films that are examples of that, of his, where he moves from, I suppose, his kind of art house um, kind of tendencies to things that are more considered, I suppose, a more kind of straightforward story. Like, for example, The Straight Story, which is a
mm,
story about a real person and a real event, and a kind of has a linear-ish narrative. But he can do it too, and then of course Twin Peaks.
absolutely. Yeah,
Twin Peaks is a in a way like a kind of an unfolding sort of mystery
yeah,
soap opera in a way.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like a fantastic complete shows that he has got a real breadth of. We think of things as Lynchian, but he's got a real breadth of actual output that goes beyond what the sort of cliche of him is.
So what do you make of this, of the child in Eraserhead? I mean, it's quite dark, isn't it, that we hear it's possibly, I mean, the thing about it is it looks like nothing you've quite seen, but maybe you have seen before, which is why you have all these rumors that it's a lamb fetus or whatever the guy said it could possibly be. And I know that I read an anecdote about the early stages of Eraserhead in which Lynch gets hold of a dead cat and then puts it in formaldehyde, which is, very serial killer vibes, what he's doing in his free time. And then he performed various operations on it, cutting it open and skinning it. Then he jettisons the plans with the cat, and then he kind of just disposes of the cat. And I'm kind of thinking this has to be early attempts at creating the child. So he was actually going out and acquiring dead animals and trying to figure out which animal would look the best as the child. Is so gruesome, really, to think about.
Well, what's interesting looking at it now. I'm just looking through a few pictures actually, because it's one of those things that again, over the mist of time, I kind of had it slightly different in my head, But looking at the picture now, you'd swear that it was the precursor to E.T. actually.
Yeah, it does have that kind of,
just
it
just
does.
in a sort of swaddling, because it's obviously all swaddled, but the head and the body shape, it's basically a kind of gruesome ET. So this obviously it's alien-like, and it's kind of, it doesn't have arms as far as you could see. It's sort of,
No.
it's like an egg with an egg sort of head, and I mean, I could imagine the fact that it's a sort of an experiment to sort of find what kind of gives you the creeps most when you were making
Yeah.
it. As in, you just play around like a sculptor would play around with kind of materials. You play around until you hit the right nerve, till
Yeah.
you get under your own skin somehow.
And I think it's important that it seems alien and grotesque, because that's how Henry has to see this child, isn't it? It's
Oh yeah.
something that is completely dependent on him and is kind of messing up his entire life, and it's so loud and noisy, just cries all night, and it's so dependent on him, and it seems to be suffering and dying because of Henry's own inability to be a father, or his neglect, or what have you.
I mean, in some ways, also, it's kind of very reminiscent of fairy tales.
Yeah.
There's I often sort of think that a lot of those sort of Grimm's fairy tales, that they have kind of, you know, outcast kind of creatures that are sort of shunned. So, sort of things like Rumpelstiltskin and stuff like that. Creatures that are kind of, abandoned, or
Yeah.
left because they're kind of monstrous. But then we feel a certain kind of, feeling that we should be looking after them as well. It feels
Yeah.
like it sort of taps into those real childhood weirdnesses. As in, should we reject this thing, or should we look after it?
Yeah, there's lots of things in folklore, isn't there, of fairies replacing babies in cots with
Yeah.
creatures that aren't quite human. I don't know where that comes from, whether it was just kids that developed illnesses, or some kind of deformities, in their early infancy, that this story came about, that it was because it had been swapped. It was a fairy
Yeah.
child, it had been swapped by the fairies. So
Well,
it kind of, taps into that kind of thing as well, doesn't it?
I think it's quite similar to the. I'm just looking up again because it's something that popped into my mind. The like the story of the shock-headed Peter. Do you remember that one? It's I think it's a German story
ring a bell.
originally,
What's that?
based on a German children's book. It's kind of like he's again a sort of strange kind of strange sort of child monster that's part of
Yeah.
it, and there was also a sort of rewriting of the story that had Rumpelstiltskin
Got you.
recently.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
Rumpelstiltskin was actually a mistreated child and
Right.
was sort of left and abandoned, and this is kind of what you get, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's definitely something quite deep and kind of built into us in our sort of fears about, you know, a rejected child or a rejected, you know, outcast child or, you know, disabled child or whatever. And it's in there in a lot of those old kind of fairy tales and, you know, Grimm's kind of old German stories.
Never wait for permission. You just have to start.
Mark and I have been following, how would you describe it, Mark? Chaos magic? Chaos magic? Chaos magic?
Lynch worked with Alan Splett to design the film's sound, and they spent almost a year creating and editing the film's sound effects. The soundtrack is densely layered, including as many as 15 separate sounds played simultaneously using multiple reels. Sounds were created in a number of ways. For a scene where Henry's bed suddenly dissolves into a pool of liquid, Lynch and Splett inserted a microphone into a plastic bottle, floated it in a bathtub, and recorded the sound of air being blown through the bottle. After sounds were recorded, they were then augmented with alterations to their pitch, reverb, and frequency. They had no money for sound stock, but heard that at nearby Warner Brothers studios, they would throw out offcuts of sound stock, literally throw perfectly good stock away. Using an AFI connection, they got onto the Warner Brothers lot and found the bins full of sound stock. Lynch, in preparation, had removed the backseat of his Volkswagen. They filled the car with the thrown out stock, and the entirety of Eraserhead sound was created on the stock from the Warner Brothers bins. After a poorly received test screening in which Lynch believes he had mixed the soundtrack at too high a volume, the director cut 20 minutes of footage from the film, bringing its length down to a trim 89 minutes.
So it is quite a short, neat film. It seems to get shorter the more I watch it. You know, the last time I viewed it, I was like, yeah, it is quite snappy, actually. I think the first time it seems so dense and scary. It seems to go on forever. But actually, it is only an 89-minute movie. And I love the story of them getting all their sound stock out of the bin. It's like that's how they did it. They just had to kind of by any means necessary, you know.
Oh, and you wonder what kind of was filmed on that sound stock that they got, you know, offcuts from as well. What kind of weird Warner Brothers film there would have been, you know, the odd accidental little bit left, you know. It's fantastic. I mean, you can tell because Lynch's sound design is so a part of it. Again, you think of Lynchian, the sort of tropes, I suppose, and yes, we think of, you know, the kind of the sort of, you know, the woman in the red lipstick, and you feel, you know, the sort of monstrous kind of expressionist kind of environments, and you know, the noir touches and all of that. But actually, the sound work that Lynch has is always so him. You can just hear it. There's always these low drones, these weird sounds that don't necessarily relate to reality, as in it's not like you're hearing something that's meant to connect with something that's in the scene that you're looking at. They're just there to create a mood, to unsettle. And obviously low register stuff, you can imagine if they were pitching around with you know, things that they've done with recording, just to kind of constantly unsettle, you know, baby sounds manipulated and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, Lynch is so kind of creative with his sound, and usually when you look at his credits, there's always David Lynch has done some of the sound work, some of the sound design. He's often created some music. Some of his films he's done all the music for. So yeah, I think you know, that kind of falls back into that whole thing about I suppose the artist wanting to participate in everything, you know, building building the kind of bits of the set, and the drain pipes and the walls, and
Yeah.
then putting the lights where he wants to put them, and then
But
making
the
the
sound is definitely
sounds.
incredibly, yeah, the sound was always even back here, and you're right,
Yeah,
all through his films is incredibly important to him, the way
amazing.
things sound. I remember going to see a David Lynch art exhibition in Paris.
Yeah.
I had a mate who called me up and said, me and a mate are going to jump in a car and going to see this art show by David Lynch in
Mm.
Paris tomorrow. Do you want to come? He's going to be there. And we
Wow.
were so super excited, and we went, but we got held up in traffic and we missed David Lynch by about 40
Ah,
minutes. But the show was amazing. And in the show, across speakers in the gallery, they were just feeding in these kind of drones and hushes and these little kind of sounds that were just curated by him, obviously, but they were just, you felt like you were inside a David Lynch film. It
yeah.
was fantastic. And I wonder what they were, they mentioned there the layering of the sounds. Like, how would they, I'm trying to think with the kind of antiquated kit they must have had. Clearly,
Mm.
no 15-track mixing desks available to them. I wonder what they were doing here, where they said, many reels layered. I'm kind of
Yeah.
imagining him and Alan Spett with just like a million machines all run spinning at once, like a couple of mad scientists. How do you reckon they must have gone
Well,
about do that?
they must have had some kind of multi-tracking,
Mhm.
because you lose quality so much when you're going from, say, one track down to a nut down to one master, and then you put another on the top, and you put another
Yeah,
on top. So I'm guessing they would have worked with, I don't know, an 8 track at the very
yeah,
least, possibly even a 16 track. But then you're right, still they would have had to have had multiple reel to reels, um,
yeah,
to play stuff back. Probably not in real time, but maybe if they have some sort of, say, 8 track or 16 track recorder, and then they're reusing their master source
yeah,
to play things in, almost like a DJ would, as in hitting
yeah,
go at
yeah.
the exactly the right moment, pitching it around and hitting stop at the right moment, and recording that onto their 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 sort of mixed. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's a completely different story now. You can get
Yeah,
as many tracks as you could feasibly ever want
yeah,
on a very average computer, and it's no, and a million and one different sound sources for free, and
yeah.
sound libraries with gigabytes and gigabytes of material. So in a
Different
way,
now, very different now.
yeah, and I mean, the sort of advantages of that are, that you can have make things sound quite professional, very cheaply,
Mm,
But I can only imagine. I mean, if that took a year, I can only imagine the effort, the physical effort that went into it, because you're just dealing with technical problems all the time.
mm,
Tape is people romanticize tape. It's in comparison, it's a complete nightmare to use. I mean, it's an
mm,
absolute
mm.
nightmare. Um, and I would imagine there'd be a lot of happy accidents that would have happened, that he would have gone, oh, I didn't think that was going to do that, but that's actually great. As in
Yeah,
he was one for embracing accidents, and the sort of serendipitous kind of layering of things. Probably it
absolutely.
was probably
Yeah.
a real playground, a real sort of fun experimental time. And for sure, it's I'd like the cliche is that sound is 50% of a film, but you almost think with Lynch it's just a little bit more, because
Edges it, doesn't it?
it
Yeah.
so absorbs it. If you watched it silent, you'd be like, okay, but when you listen to it and watch it, it's everything is there. The atmosphere is created, the mood, the sort of environment, that weird sort of strange nether space just wouldn't be the same without the sound that's there.
And I love the idea of them making these sounds. Of course, they didn't have the benefit of, like you say now, just completely limitless sound libraries, but they were making their own sounds by sticking mics in plastic bottles and blowing through them and all kinds of. It was, in the absence of having all those luxuries that we might enjoy today, they just got creative and just started making their own sounds, their own
Yeah.
sound effects, which is wonderful.
Well, I just had a quick flick on it found something online here, and
Yeah.
there's a whole Alan Splett library that you can actually download,
Oh,
uh,
amazing.
which is just literally called Cinematic Winds.
Oh, Alan Splett's cinematic wins. How wonderful.
Eraserhead sound design has become one of the defining elements of the film. The creation of the evocative soundscape truly enhanced and enriched Lynch's already powerful visuals. The industrial humming and droning provides a low-level background noise in every scene that fosters an undeniably threatening and unnerving atmosphere. There are suggestions that the sounds featured in the film are perhaps the product of Henry's own imagination and are manifestations of his own fear and anxiety. The film has been noted for its strong sexual themes. Opening with an image of conception, the film portrays Henry as a character who is both terrified by and fascinated with sex. Henry is presented as an everyman figure, his blank expression and plain attire keeping him a simple archetype. He displays pacifistic and fatalistic inactivity throughout the film, simply letting events unfold around him without taking control. That is until his final action, the apparent killing of his own offspring.
So, yeah, Eraserhead, what do you think is kind of going on in the film, and what is there any explanation you can find about what it is about? I know David Lynch would hate us kind of discussing this, but it's quite right, isn't it? There is this kind of there are themes of sex. Henry's kind of horrified fear at things like sex and his new child that has been born into the world. I don't know. It's kind of weird. It kind of leaves you feeling quite unsettled and upset in many ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's clearly not a kind of enlightened sexual being yet, is he? And look, I think that theme does run through quite a lot of Lynch's work, in that there's sexual violence in quite a lot of his films. So
Yeah,
you only have to think about kind of Blue Velvet, and sort of women in the middle of it who are kind of very mistreated, but then in some ways kind of get a kick out of it. So the sort of Dennis Hopper sort of character is clearly really messed up
yeah,
in his relationship towards sex and women. It's very
yeah.
dark kind of place. But then the is it Isabella Rossellini's character in it is very sort of almost enjoys being hit. It's very weird and very
Very
kind of
dark.
very dark. And I suppose in Eraserhead, it's almost like someone who has not yet become fully a man, fully a person, and is suddenly being thrown into being a man. And of course, the way in which that he's been thrown into having to be a man is by having a sexual encounter. And it's kind of like that thing of like you're not really in control. The whole thing
Yeah,
feels like he's out of control. He wants to do this thing, but it's thrown his life into turmoil. And I think it's an interesting thing, and it's very dreamlike, like a nightmare, and it's very non-traditional cinema that you have the lead character so passive in some ways,
yeah,
as in it is like a Kafka, where you're thrown into an environment where it's just happening to you, and you don't seem to provoke events. And we all hear it, don't we? When you write a script and someone reads it, and usually it's always like, well, the lead character's a bit too passive. The lead character's a bit too passive, And I think that's the point in this film, is that he is sort of the victim of his circumstances that he's overwhelmed by, and like a nightmare, because of course sometimes you have dreams where you feel like you influence events, don't you?
yeah.
And other times you don't. Other times you're just like like you're watching a film, whether you're the experience, it's your experience of it, or you're watching someone else experience it. It's almost like you are passive, and that is a sort of dreamlike experience, and that's a nightmare experience, in fact, when you can't control things. So it kind of makes sense that he's kind of his urges, if you like, have kind of created this world for him that he can no longer kind of
Yeah.
control. He he's lost in this sort of nightmare. That doesn't stop the urges occurring, the kind of
No.
drive for desire, but it has thrown him into this universe where he's unable to have any influence over his destiny, if you like. So it's an interesting kind of dialectic between the controlling aspect that most storylines are about, as in
Mm.
most traditional cinema is there's a character, they're thrown into a new environment, and then it's their struggle to influence the world. And if it's a heroic figure, they at the end, it's a happy ending because they become a kind of they overcome their flaws and all of that. If it's a tragedy, they are they battle against it, and then at the end they fail. So I wonder where you think he fits in. Is this a tragedy? Is this a comedy, or is it something else?
I feel that this is completely David Lynch in the film. I feel that he is working through something here because we've learned how controlling he was artistically,
Yeah.
possibly in all aspects of his life. And we've learned that he has become a father by accident. It was unplanned. And I think maybe David Lynch feels, or he felt in the years leading up to making Eraserhead, that suddenly his life was out of control and he wasn't in control anymore. And as an artist, he felt like he wanted to have that control over his surroundings and his life and where he was going. And I don't think he felt he had that anymore. And maybe this film is his way of working through those feelings and those emotions and that feeling of being completely lost and out of control and
Mm,
uh, not having the rudder to the ship in any way and kind of just being kind of, I think he felt like Henry, being this
mm,
kind of passive character who's getting bashed about and just kind of on the waves and not really having, direction.
mm,
I also feel a bit like the film is, and this is quite true for a lot of Lynch's subsequent films, is that it's about the horror of the mundane. There's a scene in which Henry goes to dinner at the girlfriend's house, and it gets taken in quite surreal and to nightmarish extremes, but yet it perfectly describes that feeling of being socially awkward
mm,
and a bit uncomfortable as a dinner guest. He really taps into things that we feel every day, but he is describing those feelings brilliantly
mm.
in a very nightmarish and
Heightened,
surrealist
yeah.
way. Yeah, but yeah, I feel like this film really feels personal to David Lynch in a way
Mm,
that he's a young filmmaker. It's his first film, and I feel like he's gone because I've read many accounts that David Lynch was, and we can tell now, he's a very attractive man. And as a young man, he got a lot of attention from ladies, apparently. And they all seemed to like him. He was very charismatic. And I think maybe he felt just like Henry in the film fancies the lady who lives in the flat across the corridor. He feels like he shouldn't be burdened down with his child. He should be able to have a lovely, sexy time with the lady who lives across the corridor, even though she is, metaphorically. But he maybe he felt like Henry. He felt locked and trapped in
mm,
this kind of new life that he hadn't really planned for or asked for or invited. It just kind of had happened to him.
mm. There's a startling story as well, which I think perhaps is shows a kind of a world that you could imagine a young David Lynch being really struck by. There's a startling
Mm,
story that he says I think it's in the Art Life
mm,
documentary, but perhaps it's in one of the books. But he describes a story of being out late with his brother in his local
mm.
town, and um,
Ah,
uh,
yes, I know this one. Yeah.
and uh, and out of the blue, a woman walks out of the darkness, naked, completely naked, covered in blood,
Yeah.
and completely white as a sheet, with a kind of a blank stare. And she walks past them, and they never see her again. And that image of just you can imagine the young imagination of this of a young man thinking this beautiful woman naked, but has clearly just been the victim or has experienced some terrible violence, walking through the dark.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Uh, I mean, how many times have we seen something like that in a Lynch
Yeah.
film as a result? This not that his his scenes of sex are kind of glamorizing violence in any way, but in some ways connecting this sort of beauty with violence, and what you can just imagine his mind was blown by this, and he imagined a million different scenarios, and then
Yeah.
we got to see all of those possible scenarios for all of the films that came
Yes.
next. As in what he was thinking, what happened there, and those are the sort
It
of
set his
results
mind
of
racing. Yeah. Yeah.
and we got to see those, from Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway and Blue Velvet, and to a certain extent as well in Eraserhead, this kind of strange connection with violence and sex and beauty that seems to come up so much in the films.
Sat listening to your first podcast. What the hell are these two guys talking about? I mean, generally, I'll be brutally honest. I'm going to be brutally honest with you.
Please,
because I think you two need it.
We need it.
Nobody's going to give you that much. If you two want to genuinely make a film, genuinely, and not just talk about it, you have to do it yourself. That's your first film. And you have to get yourself out.
So we haven't talked yet about the lady in the radiator. So I think I misunderstood her when I first watched the film, because on my first viewing I thought she was quite comical. Possibly this is because coming from the UK as we do, she reminded me very much of Vic and Bob. Because you can draw very clear lines of influence from Eraserhead to Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer's early stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, if Lynch got Jack Nance to kind of do the whole thing in a Geordie accent, it would the whole thing would be an excellent episode of Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, really, wouldn't it? It's got that kind of surreal kind of quality to it. But yeah, so I mean, I've got written down here, Henry's own sexual desire or potency is manifested in these grotesque sperm creatures, the creatures that the lady in the radiator stamps on as if to destroy Henry's own sexual potency in a way of ensuring that the horror of the unwanted pregnancy doesn't happen again. She also seems to encourage Henry to commit murder and kill the baby, and once he commits the act, she seems to meet him in a bright light and hold him tightly. So yeah, on a couple more views of the film, you're like, this is dark. Who is the lady in the radiator? Is she like death, or is she some kind of dark force that is clearly presenting itself in a cutesy way with a nice, doing a little tap dance and the little wig and the cute dress, but behind that there's something quite dark. There's some kind of malevolent force that's kind of beckoning Henry towards death, or even murder of his child. I always interpret the end scene in that she's beckoning him towards suicide in some way, as if the only way out of his plight, out of his situation, is for him to kill himself. That's kind of one way of seeing it. It's almost as if maybe he's so troubled by having to look after this kid on his own. He's obviously contemplated, I could just kill the kid, but then he would be imprisoned even more, so that wouldn't release him in any way. So then the natural suggestion is, well, I could just kill myself and then I would be out of here and it's done and it's all over with. So I don't know, what's your thoughts about the lady in the radiator?
I don't think I've ever come to a definitive conclusion. I think clearly it's the weirdest thing you've ever seen. This sort of the kind of the bungle from Rainbow Cheeks.
Big cheeks, yeah.
She's got face like a cloud. It's the classic Hollywood blonde bombshell, but with this cloud as a face. I mean,
It's
doesn't.
weird.
I think it's one of those things where it just doesn't add up, and it's really hard to decide what you think about it. Clearly, she's a kind of a fantasy for him, isn't she? She's like a sort of some sort of escape, or some sort of idealized world. Whether it's like, if everything was just wonderful, that's what it would be like. This beautiful tiny little cloud, kind of cloud babe, you know.
Yeah.
It's a very, very weird thing, and the weird little titters that she does, the weird little laughs, you know,
Yeah.
and his sort of fascination. I never read it quite that it's suicide at the end. I've always just felt
Right.
like it's like he joins with his fantasy somehow. You know, it's almost like she's the kind of she's his sort of escapism, you know, as in, and he just decides to kind of go and almost, yeah, just become part of his escapism or become part of his fantasy.
Yeah.
And I'm never quite sure if he kills his child either, because it's just not quite
No.
clear. So it's deliberately obtuse ending. But she's clearly a kind of both a sort of fantasy of his, like almost like an escapist fantasy.
Yeah. I've just
Um,
I've just gone back to listen to the song. So, you know,
oh,
the lyrics that she keeps repeating are "In heaven, everything is fine."
yeah, that's
So it's
right. Yeah,
almost like this stark contrast between Henry, who's living in a form of hell
yeah,
from his perspective, and then this woman who lives in his radiator is obviously letting him know that it doesn't need to be like that. That's why I come to the suicide conclusion. It's like,
yeah, yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
have to be, it doesn't have to be like this. Come to me and come follow me,
yeah.
and everything's going to be fine. It's all going to kind of end. Um, so yeah, I think that's why some people think she is the one that convinces him to kill the kid, but also I think that maybe the kid doesn't die. Maybe
Maybe he
it's
kills
he.
himself. Yes.
Yeah. I
Oh,
mean, I mean, what a note I made was: does the film describe a desire to commit suicide in order to escape a prison of your own creation? So you get
yeah,
in a situation so deep that the only way out, you think, is that maybe you just shouldn't be around anymore. It's
yeah.
horribly dark.
It
But
could,
it's
yeah, it could be. I mean, and you know, I suppose the good thing about Lynch is that we're still talking about it, and that
yeah,
that they, you know, we can read all of the analysis that you like on the internet, and uh, you can kind of look at, you know, even what Lynch himself has said, but then you can watch it and you can puzzle over it and you can feel conflicted, and
yeah,
the times where you watch it on a VHS and you happen to also be a new father, you come to that sort of conclusion. And then
mm.
the times when I watch it and it's a German DVD and I'm watching it on my laptop, I kind of think other things, you know, as in that's
Yeah,
it's almost context specific, you know, and who knows what I thought. I can't even remember the ending when I watched it, I think at the Scala in some point in the
mm.
late 80s, early 90s, you know. I probably didn't remember much about it, the ending at all, but I definitely remember striking images that
Mm.
you know, remain striking, and they kind of plunge you into an emotional kind of sort of roller coaster in some ways.
Yeah,
And the ending has a feeling of elation, doesn't it? It has a feeling that
yeah,
somehow we've transcended in some
yeah,
way, and
yeah,
whether that's a literal description of going to heaven,
yeah,
but maybe that heaven is you know, just the rejection of the hell of your normal life. You know,
yeah,
there's the
yeah.
Christian heaven and hell, and there's the Buddhist heaven and hell, and they don't quite align actually.
No,
The Buddhist heaven and hell is that at any one moment you're moving towards heaven or moving towards hell
yeah,
in
yeah.
your actual life, in your day-to-day life, as well as your life over your many lifetimes, if you believe in reincarnation.
Mm.
So who knows? Maybe by this point he'd started meditating and he found his
Yeah.
ending, and
He's found the ending. Yeah, exactly.
his ending was a sort of transcendence in some way out of the horrors of that he thought his life was like,
Yeah.
into a new way of looking at
Yeah. A
his
change of
life.
perception. Yeah. A change of
Yeah,
perception of his situation. Yeah.
looking at your life as heaven or looking at your life as
That's
hell.
it. That's it.
What this is, it's a DIY cinema podcast for DIY filmmakers.
We are DIY Cinema Cult.
Eraserhead premiered at the Filmex Film Festival in Los Angeles on March 19, 1977. On its opening night, the film was attended by 25 people.
Do you want to take a guess at how many people were there the second night?
Oh, wow. So when was the second night? Immediately afterwards?
The next night, yeah.
I'm going to say like 10 or something like that, even less.
It was one less. It was 24. So that's not too bad.
Yeah.
However, Ben Berenholtz, head distributor at Libra Films, persuaded the local theatre Cinema Village to run the film as a midnight feature, where it continued to play for a year. After the success at Cinema Village, the film went on to run for 99 weeks at New York's Waverly Cinema, had a year-long booking at San Francisco's Roxy Theatre from 1978 to 79, and even achieved a 3-year run at Los Angeles New Art Theatre between 1978 and 1981. From its modest, unusual, but undeniably DIY origins, the film became a commercial success, grossing $7 million in the United States and over $14 million in other territories. However, many reviews of the film were not favorable. Variety called it a sickening bad taste exercise and criticized the film's long production period, deeming the fruits of Lynch's years of labor as unwatchable.
So, not a great response from the start, I guess, from critics, but you kind of expect that, I guess, with a film like this, don't you, really?
Yeah, who cares really what they say, because in the end, the proof's in the pudding. He managed to make something fabulous, and it isn't an easy watch. It's not the sort of thing that you think, oh, I can't wait, I'm going to sit and watch Eraserhead again. It's not, it's not a Christmas viewing, but that doesn't matter. The fact that it had a lot of success in that kind of indie cult way, which I wonder if there is still the potential for now in the world that we live in. But, running as a midnight movie, well, that's a fantastic example of, alternative spaces for films to have a life, and finding its audience through, in a way, just kind of doing things in a different way. We've talked a little bit about this, over the last few years, really, as in, is there a different way that DIY filmmakers can get their things out there? Well, back then there were these sorts of things like late night cinemas where you could potentially go and see films that won't get on during the day, won't get multiplex, won't potentially even get on TV. But there's an audience for them.
No, it's hard to know, isn't it? It's like hard. Like you mentioned the Scala earlier, and I guess that was the closest thing. Like we had the Scala, maybe the Prince Charles, but I think in the States it was always a much bigger thing. The midnight features was more an established thing across the United States. That if you're a DIY filmmaker and you kind of had a DIY or genre film that existed on the fringes of public taste or decency, or was odd in some way, you could still find quite a passionate audience through the midnight circuit in the States, couldn't you? It was a really they drew lots of bums to seats over there, and that's, I guess, exactly what happened to Eraserhead. That was the kickoff for its success.
There's a good film actually that's come out about the Scala, and what you realise, what those sorts of environments created was a little bit like nightclubs, or a little bit like the free parties, or the things I've sort of been looking into. It sort of creates alternative spaces where actually they create whole cultures and communities around them, which then go and do other things. As in, often there was a lot of people who went to the Scala who ended up going and making independent films of their own, because they saw the buzz that you get from something that's a little bit transgressive and unusual in that kind of environment, and they loved it, and they thought, I'm going to go and make my own thing. And I think films like Eraserhead, because it's not a big glossy film, because it has got opaqueness, because it's confusing for the first, second, or even the third time you watch it, would be able to sit really well in a kind of, I'm going to go and see Eraserhead again, because I didn't understand a bloody word of it the last time. I hope in a way that there are new ways for that sort of cinema to find its audience, because like we said earlier, to get even anything off the ground in the conventional way, everything on the page has to be explained ad infinitum. So there is really no margin for the opaqueness and the challenging areas that a film like Eraserhead would put you into. So in a way, the only way those films are going to be made is if they are done DIY, because then you're not answering to all of the criteria that you have to get a film made or get a film actually financed. You're making it because you have an artistic vision, hopefully. That will come with a load of problems. That will come with all of the challenges that does, and we know very well. But it does potentially mean that more unusual vehicles, more unusual cinema can be the result, and we just have to hope and work towards finding the spaces for those sorts of films to exist. Beyond the, I suppose, the likes of YouTube, where it's just thrown up there and who knows, no matter, and also beyond the film festivals, which are fabulous, but they are one-off screenings. Where do these more unusual films that have this DIY principle at the heart and that can have the potential landscapes and worlds evoked and created that wouldn't be done with the conventional means, where do they get to live, where people get to see them?
Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a rebirth of the midnight feature circuit in this country? Like, we were chatting the other day in the pub, weren't we? And we may even do a pod on it at some stage, but breathing life back into cinemas that are, many screens are sitting empty. There's not a lot of people moving through them, with the people moving to streaming a lot more and watching their films that way. Cinemas are struggling, and that would be an incredible way if you could put films on in these beautiful cinemas that we've got all over the country, for reduced ticket rates, get experimental DIY low budget filmmakers showing their films in there, maybe recouping some of their budget back. It just feels like there's a little flow of industry at the low end of the film industry that could be really helped and really help the screens as well, help those empty screens.
Absolutely, because there's nothing better than as a film experience than watching it with other people in an environment that's a packed room, and you feel their moments of horror and you feel those moments of shock and surprise and laughter, and you're absorbed in a kind of a fully dark space with fantastic sound. There's nothing better, and adding to that potentially an element of meeting a filmmaker or hearing how people got their films off the ground, that kind of interactive element as well. I think this, hopefully we can be some part of bringing that concept back in some way.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Final budget for Eraserhead was $100,000.
Yeah.
So the initial budget from AFI was $10,000. That's a big chunk of change they made from paper rounds and waitressing tips.
Well,
and so on. $90,000, which I guess is what explains why it happened over 5 or 6 years, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I guess that's
thank God they did.
Yeah, I guess that's the equivalent of about £1 million now.
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah.
And if you think about that in terms of over 5 years of expenditure, well, all the payment in kind that goes involved, because often people think, well, what's your budget of your film? Well, here's the actual cash we have, which we both of us know is often quite low, and then here's the amount of work people have actually put into it, effectively in kind. Here's the amount of favors we've pulled. Here's the amount of different kind of things that we've got on the cheap, things that we don't. If you look at it in terms of, well, that's the money that's in the bank account versus the actual cost of something, in terms of people's hours, people's efforts. If you actually totted up the cost, well, it would be completely different. Of course, it would be utterly different.
Oh my God, 100%. Well, it all paid off in the end. In fact, while working on The Elephant Man, Lynch, he was in England making that.
Yeah.
Lynch met director Stanley Kubrick, who revealed to Lynch that Eraserhead was his favourite film. I mean, I don't think you
Wow.
can get a higher kind of fuck
Wow.
those critics.
Yeah.
You can't get a higher accolade than that. And he told Lynch that he'd screened the film to cast and crew of The Shining to help explain the mood he wished to create for his own picture. So I think you can't really top that, really, when you've
No.
got Stanley Kubrick telling you that you've done good, you've done a
Well,
good job.
well, that again, that takes me back to seeing that poster, because I think it was
Yeah,
all around that era when my mum was working at the cinema, and there was those posters that were really stuck in my head when I was young,
yeah,
which was there was the Eraserhead poster, there was the Raging Bull poster, and there was the Shining poster, and those were the three that were really in my head. And I guess that when you
yeah.
describe the process of the distribution of the film, that it was,
Mm,
yes, it was screened in 1977, but it was still being screened all over the place in 1978, 79, 1980, 81. It was one of those movies that it didn't have a shelf life in a way.
yeah,
It just, because it was so unusual, and the fact that it influenced The Shining absolutely makes sense to me, because it's got that similarly on a higher production budget level, clearly, but it's got a similarly kind of nightmarish feeling of someone who's out of control of their own
yeah.
life and is somehow trying to figure out what, trying to in some way control themselves. And of course,
Yeah.
there's a lot of parallels in the story, isn't there, with The Shining, because he tries to kill his child.
I mean, it's an amazing run, isn't it? I mean, literally years and years of theatrical screenings. And I guess it just goes to show that if you had a cult hit on that midnight circuit, you could
Yeah,
play for what we just described as 3 or 4 years almost continuously. It's kind of
yeah,
incredible, isn't it, really?
fantastic.
I was doing the research for him during the Elephant Man when he was making the Elephant Man costumes. I realized to my great surprise that he was living in Wembley Park.
Yes, he
He
told
was
me
living
this.
in a
Yeah,
rented house in Wembley Park because the studio where they filmed a lot of the stuff was the old Lee Studios,
yeah,
which was in Wembley Park. So I'm kind of fascinated by that. Like, where the hell was David Lynch living in Wembley Park? In his garage building an Elephant Man. It's kind of stunning, really, to kind of think that that was kind of going on in
yeah.
that part of town.
Well, I mean, the Elephant Man, I'm sure, was done in a different way, not perhaps quite as DIY, but it definitely has that sort of amazing Lynchian tone about it. And I love the idea that it was done again in such a sort of domestic humdrum and experience.
Yeah.
The banality of being in Wembley Park, and that it was being invented there is fantastic. Absolutely love it.
Lynch once said about Eraserhead, it is a personal film, but no critic or no viewer for that matter has ever come close to giving an interpretation that is close to my own interpretation.
Mm.
So I wonder, Aaron, if we've come close or within a sniffing distance. I probably presume we haven't. I don't think we've probably come close, have we?
I mean, I think all we can do is we can acknowledge that he's given us a fantastic playground to explore, and in some ways, that's sort of almost better than having a definitive account. I remember having lengthy arguments with people after watching Mulholland Drive, which is possibly my favourite of his and one of my favourite films for sure ever. Um, and of course, because we know about Mulholland Drive, he had to completely change tact halfway through the
Mm,
production process. It was going to be a series, and then he ran out. The studio walked away, and so he had this half finished film, and he just changed tact and basically decided that the story was going to be something different. Um, in a way, choosing to sort of take the serendipitous path and make a virtue of it, which he's done many times. And I remember having lots of arguments with people afterwards, friends of mine, about what it meant and what the structure the shift from one character being one way to another being another way. And then at the end, I was actually much happier with the feeling of like, well, I'm just enjoy the fantastic playground that he's given us to discuss this and to explore it, rather than think that there is one definitive answer underneath that's just the tick, the kind of it's that, so then I don't have to think about it anymore. Much more interesting to have this fabulous space to explore that feels endlessly deep. That means you can rewatch it like the greatest films have always done. We still watch Citizen Kane, you still watch Apocalypse Now, you still watch Mulholland Drive, because they give you that space. They give you those those mysteries that perhaps hints at our spiritual feelings, as in what is beyond, what is out there, what is beyond our humdrum experience, and that's more powerful for me than a definitive answer, even if it is David Lynch's.
We are DIY Cinema Cult. On Instagram, we are DIY_cinema_cult. Seek out the DIY Cinema Cult group on Facebook. Like and subscribe and follow us.